All right, everyone, welcome to the Inclusive Activism podcast. I'm here with some very near and dear friends that I've only just met, but I'm really looking forward to getting to know much more deeply. I have Katee Van Horn and Jackye Claton from the Inclusive AF podcast. I love your AF, by the way, too. Like, that's one of the things that I really appreciate most about you and what you do. And so we're going to have them with us for the next 40, 45 minutes-ish, and we're just going to kind of like have like the diversity inner circle roundtable and let you listen to like the breakthroughs, the breakdowns, the laughs, the cries that happens in our world. And we're going to kind of share some of that stuff with you. But before we do that, I'm a big believer in letting people speak for themselves. And so I would love for you to introduce yourself in the words and language that you feel most comfortable with. Who are you? How did you get into this work? And if they want to get a hold of you later, like, what do you do and how could they get a hold of you? Any person want to go first?
Katee does.
All right,
Katee
Katee.
does. No, I'm just kidding. I'm Katee Van Horn. I lead VH Included Consulting and Coaching, and I do consulting for organizations around strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also help with implementations. I am a cisgender female, white, from Ohio originally, and have lived in Arizona for most of my adult life with a few brief stints in different states. I am an auntie to 9,000 nieces and nephews, and I'm kind of not exaggerating when I say that. And you can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, and also on the Inclusive AF podcast with my amazing co-host, Jackye Claton.
Oh my God, you can find me there too. Hi, I'm Jackye Claton. I'm a lovely shade of brown, cisgender female, she, her, hers pronouns. I spell my name funny, Jackye with a Y-E. I refer to myself as Black. I always make sure that is mentioned. I'm the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist for a software company called Seek Out, where we help people find candidates and potential candidates for their organizations when they're looking for diverse talent. So my background's really in the HR recruiting and HR tech space. And so I kind of bring all of those things forward. Did I do good? I think I did good.
I think you did. Yeah, I think you
Yes.
did. You have the job when they're like, when everybody looks around and they're like, wait, everybody looks the same. And they finally figured it out after 45 years. They call Jackye.
Right. And then my favorite thing, since you said what we were going to talk about, some of the things that we were going to talk about, and I couldn't, there's some things that I tweet out when I get a little triggered, but then there's some things that I just can't do. Can I share it? I didn't know if you had anything else.
Yeah.
So this is my favorite. Like, people will say, so how do I reach out to diverse candidates? Which is like what do you mean? Like, this is after you've gone through everything. By the time you have people that are finding diverse talent, you've already talked about like explicit and implicit bias. You've talked about like the gaps in hiring. You've talked about the history of what they're hiring. And then you go through all these things and then they're like, basically telling you like, I don't know, I'm afraid to talk to Black people. And I never know what to say. Like, how am I supposed to reach out?
They don't even have friends.
But why is it any different? It's like, okay, maybe, you know what? No, I'll lose my job. I was going to say, maybe I'm going to start saying, I think you should just go in and just tell them that they're Black and you want to hire them because of that.
You're Black, like as they walk around the street.
Right. I don't know. I think it's funny when people have, we talk about there being a separation without recognizing, because we don't see it every day, but we see it in our work, how huge the gap is. Yeah. Like, it's huge.
Yeah.
And there are some times where you're just like, I don't know. Sometimes I laugh, and sometimes, I'm just deep in some Ben and Jerry's with a tear. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do the next day.
So I have a follow-up question I want to ask you, Jackye, because like usually
Is it what flavor of Ben and Jerry's? Because that's what I want to know, Rowdy. What flavor
go
of
ahead.
Ben and Jerry's?
Chunky monkey.
Thank you. All right, now you can follow up with the appropriate question.
Oh God. All right. So Jackye, what do you do when they're like, okay, we want to hire people? Really? Because this is what they say. We want to hire people, but what they really want is they want tokens.
Right.
How do you deal with that when they're like, Jackye, like we want it to look a little bit different here, but really what we were hoping for is, do you have some like token like black and brown people we can hire that aren't going to make waves? And like, how do you navigate that problem?
No. I usually, I wish they would say that. It would make it a lot easier instead of having to, weeks to get there. Usually what I do is I ask them what their plan is. What is their strategy? What are their key performance indicators? How are they measuring success? And if they don't have any of that, then I say, we need to start someplace else. Let's start with that. Where are your goals? Let's start with that. And like, what do you have in place to support these people is generally what I'll ask, whatever the group is. Because, it's funny. And I, when we were talking about people that like are disabled, right? And you have a house that has like 3 stories in it. You wouldn't just invite a bunch of people in wheelchairs to your house and then just be like, good luck. I invited them, like, how am I, you would do something about it. You would not invite them to your house. You would make sure that you had a ramp. And it would be no question. So it's always funny when you have other things where we're talking about equity and inclusion, like that people don't think that they have to prep and plan if they're changing things, especially the culture.
Yeah.
But I do stress a lot that there's going to be conflict. And I think that's the other part, because what you're talking about is very adequate. Like, I want somebody who looks different than me, but thinks the same way as I do. And I think it's always a shock for people. Like in my case, like I know how to fit in various groups. And then if I have to go off on people are like actually shocked. And me, I'm always shocked that it's taken that long. Like you've never seen that before. Like that means we're not friends. That's what it basically means. For Katie. I just think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that people think that they want to do the token stuff. That's the wrong way to do it. But I generally start by showing them how many people they've lost in the last year. So usually we're able to go in and say and analyze the problem right away.
That's good. That's really effective. Like one of the things I worked with a company and they were like, we want to like interview people. And I'm like, so your metric is people you don't hire, just people that you interview. Is that what you want? And they're like, yeah, maybe that's the wrong metric, right? I'm like,
nope, that seems totally solid. Solid plan.
Maybe.
Go for that.
We just want to talk to them, not hire them. And call
just go to Starbucks.
But here's the thing, you're using language so Rowdy of like, oh, we want a token. To Jackie's point, I wish they were that transparent, because a lot of times they're like, no, we're fully vested in this, and this is something that's very important to us, and we're all in. And then you start actually picking apart what they're doing, and you're like, no, you're not. No, you're not doing the things. You're not doing what you need to do. You're not looking at the data. You're not asking the questions. And so there is that like kind of moment of truth almost of like, okay, are you truly invested, or is this just a check the box activity? And to your point, like, do you just want a token, whatever, that you can put on your career page to say, look, we have a Black person, check them out. Aren't they fancy? Come and look. You know what I mean? So I think there's the questions you have to ask when you're starting to work with a client. I think you can find out real quick how truly committed they are or not.
One of the things I'm curious to ask you all about is because it's one of the things we're starting to find in higher ed that's really problematic, and it's super nuanced and complicated, right? Is we'll have folks that kind of like tokenize themselves because like you learn this as a person of color. You're like, you have to kind of like do these things in order to be successful. You have to speak and do whiteness in a specific way. And like we get rewarded for those things as people of non-white people. And then it's hard because like we're like, oh, you kind of are going to come in here and not really give us the diversity we want because like you've been enculturated into tokenism. And then we have white folks that know and understand better and can push stuff, but then they're also not from diverse backgrounds. And we're finding ourselves in this really huge catch-22 because we like hiring a token can be worse, right? Because that can take you backwards because people can be like, yeah, absolutely, you should do this. And they're like, no, that's the exact wrong idea. But it's also hard because like, again, people of color have like been taught over and over again, do and perform and act in whiteness ways and you will be rewarded for those things. And it's not like we can stop the interview and be like, hold on, like Steve, no, you can just be really like you do because we need a real you, right? Like,
But that
oh,
could be a real them. That's the
that's
thing
true.
that I
I know.
always deal with. Like I always say I'm a Black woman of privilege that's lived like, but I was always the only Black person there. So I'm not acting any certain kind of way. This is the way I am.
Right.
It took until I was an adult to meet other people like me that had those same experiences. But I am always quick to tell people when some of these things started coming out, when people started looking for more diverse talent, I recognized my privilege and I should pat myself on the back for this because this was when we weren't even talking about this stuff. And I was like, I'm not the person that you're looking for if you're trying to make impact, right? Like you're not going to get, some big thing. You didn't take me from a certain background or give me opportunities that I didn't have. Like I'm like an entry person. And I always laugh. I have a friend that we used to be coffee friends. One was she was lesbian and another one that was Jewish. And we used to always say we were the tokens because we would get invited to all these parties, right? And we would look at each other's like, I'm the only Black person. She'd be like, I'm the only, there's the one, and I live in a small town. It's like, I'm the one trans person this person knows. And I was invited because, they're on like the Young Democrats and they're trying to show that they have people in these groups. But I still think, I think you don't want, people say that they want people like that, but they don't.
I know.
They don't. I mean, you don't, unless your culture is already like that. And if your culture is so far already like that, then you don't have a problem, So, I mean, but I do think it's hard. I feel worried. I mean, everybody has their stories, but when it comes to this work, I always feel bad for my little best friend, Katee, because I know people come to her, like people still come to me with some crazy stuff where I'm like, I can't believe you just said that. But I think Katee gets it worse, where they're like, oh, Katee, you teach diversity, but you're white. So let's just not talk about can we not talk about white privilege in this class because people don't like that? And then Katee's like, Katee coming out of the closet, I think is more aggressive than me coming out of the closet when Katee's like, no, and we're dealing with this right now.
Well, but that's also part of my privilege that I can call people to the carpet to be like, you've lost it. This is not okay. And no, we're not going to shut down this conversation because it is a difficult one, or it might make people uncomfortable. And I think that's part of this too, is we all need to be in on the conversation. And Rowdy, to your point, I think one of the things that we're finding as well within this world of like DEI consultancy, people of color have just been nominated as, hey, you need to do this work. And there is this like lack of what are the actual steps and the things you need to do to create change. And so they're coming at this from a place of ignorance, and it's not their fault. They've just been placed into this role and it's like, go do the thing. And they don't know how. And so I think there's also like, what a disservice we're doing to people of color to not give them the tools and also have these conversations that this is actual real work. And it's kind of like, I mean, HR, I've been in HR forever. And similar situation for our industry where it was like, oh, we could just have, the admin can just be the HR person too.
That's right.
And you're like, that's cute, but let me tell you how you're not going to get sued, because that's what I know.
Right.
Your admin can fill paperwork out, but I can also make sure you don't get sued. And I think that's the approach that Jackye and I both take, because we have this HR background. She has this recruiting background, and like the tools that she has. One of the challenges that so many companies have right now is we want to source for more diverse talent, but at what point do I identify what categories they are, or how they identify, or whatever it might be, without getting into legal trouble? And so that's, a conversation that every organization is having right now, and that Seek Out is trying to really answer the question of like, how do we do this the right way legally to make sure that, down the line, it isn't, oh, you didn't hire me because I am this. And so there's also that piece, like having that HR background, I think is very helpful for organizations, because we can hear the things you also need to be wary of down the line.
Well, and I think I'm going to say it, and I hope the right people are going to hear this. Like, when you talk about tokenism, and then you want the oppressed person to have the energy and power to not only take on additional work, you want the Black person to go teach the white people about how to deal with Black people? Like, that's how we got into this mess in the first place. I'm not doing that for you. Someone asked me if I wanted to do something on Fun Day for Black History Month. And I go, so you want me, the Black person, to not have fun on Fun Day so I can do more work for the white people? No.
For free.
No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Someone asked me once.
And Rowdy, to your point, for free. Absolutely.
Yeah,
for free. That's the bigger piece too. It's also the go do these things, which take emotional labor, which labor.
Right.
And aren't fun to really dig in on. I was just into something earlier about, that their Black History Month always included watching Roots. And how like traumatizing every single year it was to watch Roots, which is not a fun movie, not a good read, fun. Like it's brutal. Yeah. And then and it was like, oh, this is what we do to celebrate Black History Month. Like, how is that a celebration? How is that something that's good?
That's not a celebration.
No, not
at all. I saw something that said, let's change it to Black Heritage Month, because there are people, it's not just history. Like, there are things going on right now that people need to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But people in general, they try. Some people try. But in general, they just...
Well, I think everybody's trying. It's just hard because we don't live in a society where it's okay to admit you don't know, right? Because like,
absolutely.
I'm curious to ask you, Katee, like, so you have to get like two really interesting, disparate situations, right? Because my partner's white, she does some DEI work as well. And so she'll walk into space and she'll see like the people of color and they're like, like, who are you? Like, white lady? Okay, right. We'll see how this goes. Or you've got the person that's been put in charge and they're like, oh my God, like I'm lost. I have no idea what to do. Like, so you get like such disparate approaches. Like, what is it like attempting to navigate that?
I think it's fun personally, but I'm a very odd person. So for me, I think it's great because I can go into a situation, and I think the approach that I always take is I'm just here to learn and I'm just here to grow, and I'm on a journey as well. And so for me, I know that I can say certain things in a room that some other people might not be able to. And I also can go in as a consultant, and you, Rowdy, and you and I have had this conversation. As a consultant, I can say a lot of things that an employee cannot. And I'm like, they can be mad at me. It's okay. That's part of the fun. But it's also to your point, like there are conversations that I'm like, whoa, just because I'm white does not mean I'm cool with this conversation or that this is okay. And so it's just bringing everybody along of like why I actually do this work. And one of the main things for me, I truly believe in, being that ally, and not because I need to be the voice, but to bring other people into the room so their voice can be heard. And also I know, like I said, that I can say things to a white man that Jackye cannot. And I can say things to a white woman that Jackye cannot. But I also know there's things that I can't say that Jackye can.
That you better not say.
I better not say. Let me make a list.
And same on my side. Like I am
Yes.
not. I usually at those moments I call Katie and I'm like, okay, Katie, this is where I'm at.
It's like the
You know?
lifeline. You're on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I'm like, I need a lifeline right now.
We do it to each other all the time. I literally
Like
have
every other day.
like the other day I had someone that was like, we don't want to say the words white supremacy because it's a hot topic right now. And I was like, but that's what it is. So this is going to be difficult to not say those words.
As a communication person, I just want to make a new word and be like, okay, here's the new word. It equals white supremacy. Does that make you feel better?
Right.
Like, we still got to deal with this.
Well, it's like the same thing as like privilege. People are so opposed to using the word privilege and are so like, oh, not me. I don't have privilege. Not me. My life has been very hard. I don't know if you guys know this. Very hard.
That's my favorite. My favorite is when you're talking about cotton, slavery, and Black people picking cotton, and they're saying, well, my grandpa was a cotton farmer. Like those are the conversations that push me right. I'm dangling. Like I have to like do yoga, take like
that's where you want to be like, he got paid, right? And like
he did that by choice. Wasn't that a choice? And I think that is kind of how Katie and I got closer. I mean, we were friends anyway, but as we were both, because we're both a air quote experts, because you learn something every single day. So we're not experts. We just make this is our focus area. So we've got a lot of things that we can recall that we're looking at experiences. But there's always something that will come up and you're like, it's almost like gaslighting so often all the time that you really think you're crazy. I mean, and it sounds nuts. And I'm sure where you're like, so is it okay to say that word? Like I so many people say it, are we allowed? We talk about language a lot, and there's so many things that people get wrong because it's hangovers at a time when people were trying to get things right. And you're like, is this right? I'm so confused. It just feels odd.
And that drive to be right is like such the problem because there's no right to it. Like I tell people, if I could just touch you on the forehead and teach you everything you need to know that I know about diversity, you'd still start making mistakes tomorrow because I still do too, right? So this leads me to one of the things I wanted to talk to y'all about. So how do y'all approach or attempt to navigate like the whole reverse racism thing when it comes up? And you can reverse it with whatever one you want. You could reverse it with sexism. You could reverse it with racism. Like, how do you even begin to start that issue when it happens?
Lots and lots of vodka. No, I'm just kidding.
That's after.
Right.
Immediately after the conversation.
In the moment, I don't do that. For me, it's asking them to explain what they mean and like really pushing them on defining it and helping them to actually like try to explain it, which they can't most of the time. And so it's kind of like it's kind of like privilege. Like when they start talking about no, my life was hard. It's the same idea. Like when you're talking about this reverse racism, you're like, explain to me why you think that is a thing, why you think that you have been somehow put into a bad spot, whatever whatever the conversation is. And usually, once you start to talk through it, they kind of teach themselves, if you will. And that's actually a good thing in my mind, because a lot of it is like getting them there on their own is a lot better than you just telling them. Yeah. So like asking them questions and probing into why they believe a certain belief.
Yeah.
That's the approach I take. I don't know, Jackye, do you have?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I teach, one of the things I do is I call it adventures in privilege, because there are so many different layers of privilege. And generally what I do is I have a string and I have these little, like, little beads where if these situations have happened to you, you get a bead, and if it doesn't, then you take it off. And so some of the questions are like, you don't have to fear about being discriminated against about your religion. People don't assume that you're not an American citizen, like all of these different things. And what's interesting, I do that because one of the things that it's very important to me is that all of the trainings are not geared just towards white people understanding Black people. It's Black people having to navigate through this and trying to reduce some of the trauma as well. So by doing it this way, then the people who automatically feel like they're disenfranchised can still celebrate some of the ways that they are privileged and think and still buy into the conversation to know that even though we know that like we have all these different experiences, to realize that there are privileges that they may have as well. And again, we ask people to tell stories. And I think it's amazing to get people to say it, because that's, to Katie's point, like it's getting them to say it. Like, I'm not going to say that's complete bogus. You will end up feeling that way as you're going through that, because it's a personal journey. And I think that's what's so complex about this work, is that it's not like learning how to make a cake and now you know how to make a cake. It's like, I've never seen flour before, or I didn't realize that butter was made out of milk, like all of these things and then they're like, whoa, like cows do that? Like you're completely blowing their mind. So you have to ease into it. And I do it through storytelling and getting people to acknowledge those things. But I think the white privilege thing from last year, whatever, is like when people say, I'm not privileged, that is the cringe. That's probably the cringiest reversal in the world.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
I'll also say, like, we're very fortunate to hear from one of your friends, a client of mine had him in for a fireside chat, and Calvin Terrell talked about privilege and put it in this, a really interesting story. And I'm not going to do a good job of interpreting it, so keep me honest here. But it was really the story of like going into a store right before a holiday weekend and knowing that all the stores were going to be closed. And he had 10 minutes, but he was on a phone call. And so he's trying to rush to get the person off the phone so he can get inside, because he knows he only has a bit of time. And then when he walks into the store, he puts on this persona so he's a Black man, very meek, personality. And I think he even mentioned like almost an effeminate character, like to try to like calm white woman down that was working the register. Yes, there you go. Thank you. Yes. So use the term partner versus, wife, so that there was the insinuation that, maybe he was part of the LGBTQ community, and then, went about his business. The white woman was okay, great, sure, whatever. Then he walks out of the grocery store and walks towards his car, and there's another car parked beside it. And that he then, was thinking, oh, okay, I need to kind of yoke up and, be a big man and, be ready, because who knows who might be in that car next to me. And then he turned it into like, but if I was a woman, I would be, putting my keys in between my fingers, and I would be, dialing 911 and just not pressing send, because I don't know if I'm going to get mugged, attacked, raped, whatever it might be. And so like that, I think, was just such an interesting story. I actually want to like steal that story out of the whole recording, because I think it's just so good, a great way to explain privilege in a way that I think for, if you focus on gender, when you think about privilege, I think it's a little bit easier for people to take. Yeah. But then it is going, okay, let's take that steps further to race, to all of these other things that you need to be aware of. And it just was really, really good. And so I think that story, like I've now mentioned it to a few folks, because I'm like, it was such a good example of like how you can talk about this stuff in a different way and get people to kind of get there on their own.
Yeah, he made it so like intersectional, right? Because
exactly
before that, he talks about talking to somebody else that's a friend, and he talks the way that he normally would, right? So he brings up kind of like code switching, how you have to code switch when it's time to go in the store and you want to be like taken seriously or like appeased by the people in the store. But then he also checks into his privileged identity when he's like, I don't really have to worry about the parked car in the same way because of that. And I think when I talk about the reverse stuff, is I've worked at it linguistically and been like, okay, well, let's look at the word racism and what does it do, right? It favors one race at the cost of all other races. And I'm like, so I pretend to get like excited. I'm like, wait, where's this place where like every other race other than white people are the favored race? And I'm like, whoa. And then I'm like, what would it look like if we reverse sexism? Imagine like every other gender except for men were the people that like got like catcalled and like slapped on the butt. I'm like, where is this place? Like, show me and tell me like where this is. And then like I'll do it with classes. I'm like, where's the one place where rich people are the one like socioeconomic group targeted? And then they're like, I think it helps them make the connections to the systemics, right? Because like then you see like you can't reverse that, right? And then I'm like, what you may have experienced is white discrimination, which can happen, right? But it's like so much of the time it's just like, can you give them the right language to like understand things, you know?
People don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between racism, prejudice, bigotry. You know, they don't know the difference between, you know, sexual preference, gender norms, pronouns. And part of it is what we were fed from, like what we read and what we watch, and we don't know what it is. And I think a lot of it comes from this effort of trying to be, you know, the more afraid that people are of making a mistake, the more mistakes they'll make.
Yeah.
And I think I think some of these things do come out of fear, where they don't recognize that you know, we still have those same genetics as if we're going to be attacked by a bear. And it's the same when I walk into a room and I'm the only woman or only Black woman and I walk in, it's the same feeling of being attacked by a bear. And I think that it's like, what do you do with all of those emotions? You're trying to suppress all of those things. And to your example, like, just go get the milk. Like, I'm just trying to get milk. I think it's one way, and one way that we deal with it in my house. My husband's white, and I say we because my kids, both of my kids identify as Black, understanding that they have a white father. We called it adventures in privilege. Like, there was a time when all of these things were going on, especially all the killings and all these things, and it was really painful. And we had a hard time just explaining it and trying to work through it. I mean, not a hard time, but we just wanted our children to understand, you know, their place and to have their value.
Yeah.
And somebody said there's no such thing as white privilege to one of my kids. So my husband and we do this thing called adventures in privilege, which make us all crack up. It's almost like a payback. Like, it'll say no parking, and my husband's like, I'm parking there. We'll be like, no, like, we're gonna get arrested. And he'll be like, no, I'm parking there, watch. And we just start cracking up. Like, it said only one thing of toilet paper. He's like, I'm taking 2 things of toilet paper. I wish somebody would say something. And we just start cracking up because we would never, you would never do that. Never, ever. And so I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's made it worse. I didn't realize there was that much privilege. You can get an extra thing of toilet paper too. Like, this sucks, you know, but he does a very good job of understanding and seeing his privilege. Like, if my tail light was out, he's like, you have to drive my car. Like, you can't leave the house with the tail light out because you might get pulled over and then something might happen. But I think for him, I think it makes him very sad to see, because a lot of people don't recognize these things that have been going on, the system that they are a part of, they are victims of as well, that made them feel this kind of way. You've been tricked.
Well, I feel like too, even with this, like, it's all absurd. Like, it's just absolutely absurd. And I think, like, one of the things that we get from being in the work so often is, like, you have to laugh. Like, laughing is, like, the only way you get out of some of that stuff. But it's hard because, like, well, you can't start with, you should be able to laugh, because they're like, no way. Because like, I can't be racist, sexist, whatever, right? And I'm like, I'm not trying to call you a thing. I'm trying to talk about behaviors. Well, you're talking about behaviors. No one's trying to like slap a label on you. And if you can find levity in moments and see the absurdity of things and laugh at stuff, and especially tell stories where you're laughing at yourself, it's just so much more approachable. But it's hard because it's the last thing you get to do at the beginning, because it's the thing that's least acceptable in those spaces, because everybody's so like scared and tight. Like, it's amazing what y'all do on a day-to-day basis, like how you navigate those things over and over again. Because again, I get to be the piss you off guy. Like, most people hire me to make them mad or to like make them uncomfortable.
I need to get that gig.
It's because like, my first job's just being a communication teacher. Like, my second job is like, hey, I need you to put people in like uncomfortable situations or to push them as far as you can take them. And then I'll like break apart the things that you said that they couldn't swallow right now, or that wasn't processable, right? Like, I'm that thing, like I get to be like in situationally, like more of the harder thing to hear, because like you couldn't always say those things, like based on where you're at and what you're being hired to do. Like, you need somebody else to say it. You need me for them to be mad at. And then you can be like, well, here's why maybe you shouldn't be mad at what he said, and how you can think about it in different ways, because it keeps the relationship for you. And then they can just be temporarily upset with me. Although
but I think what you're saying is so true, but I also would say it goes back to what we already talked about the fact that you can go into a room and say things, Rowdy, that I can't.
Yeah.
As a man, you can go in and say these things, and because of patriarchy, because, you know, whatever you want to call it, you can get away with it. If I said, they'd be like, ugh, angry woman, you know, she doesn't know what she's talking about, whatever. And so I think there's also that piece where I'm like, bring it, to be as tough as you want to be, because they need to hear it. And to your point, I can help them process through it later.
Mm-hmm.
And it will just be, yes, this is a truth that we all need to acknowledge. And now let's work through what we do about it. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Well, and on top of that, like, I pass, and I'm a person of color, and I'm male, and I'm masculine, and I'm cisgender, like, but I also have this like deep memory of like all this oppression from my past too. And so I get to be more hearable, but it's hard because what frustrates me is, you know, I have a friend named Jackye too, and she'll say something and she'll say it perfect and it's amazing and it's awesome. And then they're mad at her because she's a Black woman. That's right. I'll go, stop being mad at her. She said something that's true, and I'll repeat it. And all of a sudden it's listenable. And it's really frustrating, because she's more right faster than I am. But you can, for some reason, listen to me, who's lagging, truthfully, in my knowledge. You know, like it's I don't know.
For some people, I am the bear.
Yeah.
Me, of a Black person, I'm putting them on defense, and they automatically think it's still not, even though nobody's going to come to me and say, can we just not talk about racism in my diversity class? They still will come and have different expectations of things that they think that that we're not gonna go over, right? And things that are not pleasant, but they think, oh, she's just gonna tell us because that, like, it's personal. Like, all I care about are Black people and women, and I'm gonna just tell them that they're all racist.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and some days I want to start out just like that. You're all racist. Like, just class over.
Let's just start there.
Any tips? But I mean, we go through this journey together. And I think I've been doing it for so long. I know that going in, and also just training adults, especially in a work situation, you know, you have the person who this was their idea and they're excited about it. You have the people that are like, I don't feel like working, so I'm going to go to the program. And then you have the people that are under duress, that don't want to be there, don't think they need to be there, already know everything about it, and they are like so woke anyway, you know. And then you have the completely far, like, racism doesn't exist, you're anti-American. All of those people statistically are in your class. You know that going in.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, and I don't know, I think Katee puts people at ease, just kind of giving them like the dossier and letting them know what there's going to go and talking about what we're going to be able to do. Sometimes, depending on the mood, I just go in there and shock people right at the very beginning. Like, I usually get people to start from the very beginning. Tell me what you think about being in this class. And I think my favorite day was one said, I don't even know why I'm here. I was like, oh dear God.
You're like, I do.
This is going to be a great day.
I know.
There's your sign.
I can help.
Right. But it is hard because you do have to have a relationship, and you do. I mean, these are the people that are paying. And so part of that is making sure you have those conversations in advance. And then you say, this is what you can expect from me. This is what I promise to be able to do. This is how I handle all of these situations. But I think it took me at least 5 years of doing the work before I realized that there is trauma. Everyone has trauma. And there is no one in your class that either wasn't a victim of sexism, racism, you know, all of the isms, or has inflicted that on another person. There isn't one. And so I realize that you can take people back to the place. I mean, Katee and I did it. You remember, Katee, when we did that presentation, all those women were crying, and I was like, oh shit, that was not the intention.
Yes, it was. You can admit it to us. We want to make
it totally worked. No, I was like, my example in this case was talking about how it was a lot of older women of a certain age talking to women of another age. And the younger women were saying that they've never had sexism once, whatever. Didn't realize they haven't been victims of sexism, and they all work with all women. And then I started talking about a story about when you were young. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh my God, I had to go to dinner all of those times and they never asked me anything. And I thought it was just part of my job. Or, oh my God, you know, all of these things. And then half the people were crying. Remember? It was like, wow.
But also, like, those are the moments too where you know that, like, I try to explain to people, like, you're not going to take everything from every workshop, from every training, from every conversation and be like, got it, set, I'm done, I've got this. Like, it's the bias conversation. You cannot go to a 2-hour bias training and be cured of bias. But like, the whole point is it's this journey, and having those relatable moments, I think, in those stories helps people so much, because once you can find that connection, and once you can kind of identify for them, here is something that might be similar that you've lived through, that you've experienced it, whatever. I think that's where the learning happens, but it's also where that emotional attachment occurs. So then it becomes much more real, and it's not just
listening now.
Here's a concept that this HR chick taught us.
And but you haven't invited me back, so
well,
maybe.
Rowdy was there instead. So. Rowdy was busy yelling at them next.
So I think I'd like to wrap this up with us asking each other like a question, right? To answer, because I think that would be the most fun thing to do. So, because this is a question you have to answer that I have the luxury of not needing to worry about needing to answer, is the stupid ROI deal, right? Like, how do you even begin to, like, because like for me, I'm like, if you're asking me an ROI question, you don't want to hire me. Like, simple, right? Because like I have a job already, you know? And like, if you're asking like me to justify being a good human, then don't like pick me. I'm probably the wrong choice for you. like y'all have to answer it. Like, how do you do that? Like, I mean, because you do, and thank God you do, right? Because like that's how you eat. But at the same point in time, like that's tell us about that. We need to understand.
So for me, I think it is looking at the research and the data that proves out the point that when you have more diverse teams, you have better business results, bottom line results. That's where I start when I'm talking to the C-suite, is telling them the data of these are what other companies have achieved financially by doing this stuff. And also by making it not an HR thing, but making it a business initiative, by making it a part of their business strategy. So it is, hey, if you want to increase your bottom line results, here's a way to do it. And then you're measuring it by looking at engagement scores, by retention, by so many different things that, you can measure, but then also like that sentiment of the people. So having those conversations and just saying, what is the experience like? And if you go and ask someone, okay, hey, Jackye, what has your experience been at this company? Oh, hey, Rowdy, what's your experience been at this company? And it's a completely different experience. Then you go, okay, where are those differences and why? And so you can really start to show them, the one I'd like to talk about a lot is compensation. There's a lot of conversations about, equity and pay equity and, how do we achieve pay equity? And one of the things is when you have people coming into an organization, men and women, you are a lot of times taking their last salary and giving them an increase off of what was your last salary.
Yeah.
For women, that means you have baggage throughout your entire career.
Mm-hmm.
For men, it's not the case because they are usually at a higher pay scale or, paid higher than the women are. If you have conversations about, okay, now that you're here in the job, when's the last time you had a promotion? And start to look at the data there for people of color, for women, for anyone who's non-binary. It's a very different conversation. And so those are the types of things that you can start to unpack, like the policies, the procedures, the systems that are, yep, this is the way we do it here. And when you start unpacking those systems and kind of pull back the curtain, there is this like, oh, holy moly, we've got a lot of work to do. And then they start to understand it when you can like show them on paper or like, here's the process and why it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, where you see the benefit and kind of help them along in the conversation.
I would agree. I think a lot of what I'm looking at is the actual data. And a lot of these people, when they get to a point when they're investing all of this money and starting to try to see results. In my case, my clients call me as soon as they make a diverse hire. They get so excited. My favorite is when people seek out and they have a trial. We had somebody hire 5 Black software engineers during the trial in like 3 days, from 3 days. They were so excited. I didn't have the heart to tell them that they only have to do that like 45 more times, but
And
good place to start. Yeah. And keep them. But I think the return of investment, and I let them know that I'm just giving them, I can give them the information and the data that they weren't looking at before, and it's up to them to make the change. So that's how we look at those things, that I can bring them insight on retention, what's available, and give them the tools to make better choices. And so, it takes a long time, but giving them that information and keep tying it in and seeing those results and celebrating with them is kind of where we go, because I can't put a hard, fast line on a return on investment. If you're not going to fire the racist at your company, I can't tell you that I'm going to push the needle.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, someone told me this. I didn't tell you this, Katie. This is like the freaking bomb. Said to me, you work so hard on helping utilize data to find good fits technically for organizations and also diverse talent. Why don't you put that same effort in trying to find who is going to be the problematic person at the company? There should be fewer. Like, wouldn't that be easier? And I was like, oh no, project. But I
Now
think
you
it's
said that's what Katee does. So she'll take care of that for you.
exactly.
I like to find the problem children. It's fun.
Yes.
And say goodbye. But so to add on to that though, just to go back to the return on investment, like I think there's also a piece here that you see like the Googles and Salesforce and some of these other companies that have spent billions with a B of dollars. And like Google, I mean, that is a whole conversation in and of itself, like what they've done, what they've tried to do, and how it has failed. Salesforce is one, they did the pay equity conversation, paid millions of dollars to bring everybody to equity, and then had to do it again 3 days later or 3 years later because they didn't change anything in the process systems. So it's also like you have to do all the things. And, we talk about systemic racism, and we talk about systems and, how this actually happens and why does it happen? You have to pick apart all of those systems that by people or that people touch, meaning every time that you're touching a candidate, every time that you're touching an employee, not actually touching them, like, because that would be
Don't touch
a whole
them.
nother HR conversation that we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But when you're having those interactions with them or working with them on whatever their life cycle is, every point you have to go, what are we doing here? And how is it working or not working? Where is the bias? Rooting that out and then completely rebuilding it. And so I think that's part of it too, is like, there is this like, oh, we can just flip a switch or just buy a software and we're good to go. And it's like, no, there are a lot of things like if you have those managers that are the problem children, that has nothing to do with what amazing stuff Jackye can do for you.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's just,
And
you
it
have to
always
look at all of
goes,
it.
every single hire that you make, you are changing the company culture.
Mhm.
Sometimes just a little and sometimes huge.
Mhm.
You're either you base it on a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, sometimes 5 hour conversation without realizing, anybody can hold it together for 5 hours. And then once you have it, you don't know what the impact is. So you have to,
Some
an
people.
so then you have to look at that you have to look at it constantly. So if I could give people one takeaway, it's not going to happen in a 1 hour, anti-bias class. This is continuously changing. And as the society changes and as we make changes there, then we're going to have, those things happen internally. And so you really need somebody to monitor that has that piece, and it's not the token person, because it's hard work and it's exhausting work, and it has to be a labor of love.
Absolutely.
For everyone in the organization.
We love everybody.
Yeah.
No, I'm
All
saying
the
it has
people.
to be a labor of love for everyone in the organization.
That's right.
Everyone has to be committed to it. But yes,
But you also
love
have to
everyone.
be in you also by you will shift the balance, unfortunately, and that's what you see too. If you have one person that's the token person that's just going to make you hire one certain group, then the scales are tipped off and you've screwed up, and you've gone too far the other way.
Yeah, you regress. That's the thing that like we're dealing with is like you get the wrong person, you go backwards. And like, how do you score like a person that we don't have that looks like that in our organization over a white person that gets it, but doesn't look like our student population? And we're just so like stuck in that space.
Well, and it's also the whole like, oh, we tried that this one time and it didn't work, so we just aren't going to do it again. And then that one,
Yeah.
I have to say prayers and, do some meditation. Sage.
Yeah.
All the sage.
Aromatherapy, little, chamomile tea.
I think the US is sold out of sage right now though, because I think it got used a little bit on the 20th of January in
Fully.
a certain house. So Jackye and I were discussing how much sage had to go into the White House.
There's still plenty out here. I walk by it every day. Like
Okay, good.
Okay.
right there on me and my
You
park.
could just share that. That would be great.
So I wanted you all have a chance to ask each other questions too, or questions for everybody.
I'm ready.
Navigate. Go.
I'm ready. So I have a client right now.
Mhm.
They are looking at their holiday schedule.
Okay.
And one of the questions that they have is, we have talked about Thanksgiving and the problems with celebrating Thanksgiving. And obviously that is a federal bank holiday and obviously a holiday for most organizations in the US. So how should a company handle the fact that we celebrate Thanksgiving, give employees the day off, and usually the day after Thanksgiving as well? What should they do so they could be more inclusive and also acknowledge the genocide that really is celebrated by Thanksgiving?
So for me, and I'm just going to answer this as one Indigenous guy's like opinion. Because
Yes. I now want to tokenize you and ask you this question. Yes.
Yeah, 500 nations have a lot of different opinions. And so, but one thing I probably am somewhat safe saying on behalf of those 500 nations is we still want the day off. We don't want to necessarily have to work that day. So we're not like, we'll take the day off, the paid leave. But really it's more having the uncomfortable conversations about the truth of Thanksgiving and that it was in celebration of slaughter. And then really truly recognize the sacrifice that Indigenous peoples of this nation have made to make your company successful. Recognize that you're on the land that helps you be successful. Recognize like, you know, the genocide is part of the sacrifice that made you be in the space that you are, right? And so see that. And so what I ask people to do is not just because like, I feel like when you ask people to reflect on things, there's no do in that moment, right? And so what I've asked people to do and consider is like maybe taking that next day and really creating a culture within the company of an expectation that like, we are going to spend part of that day doing service in the community on behalf of, in recognition and on behalf of Indigenous people, right? And so maybe you feed people at a soup kitchen, maybe you go and clean up the land, do some litter pickup, right? Because like that's a big deal, like for Indigenous folks, like maybe doing service in recognition of the sacrifice of Indigenous peoples with that next day. Because even in Indigenous cultures, we don't know what to do on Thanksgiving either. Do we eat? Do we have turkey? Do we fast? Because some people like Calvin fasts like over that day. And like, there's not one right answer, right? And it's how do you navigate that? And what do you do to bring the right heart to that as best as possible? Because it's another situation where there's not a right answer. But I feel like if you're really going to recognize something, it should cost a little bit. And I think that service on behalf and in recognition is something that acknowledges the cost and then also pays, if not back forward in some way. And then ask people to get out of that, I don't know, problematic mindsets too. Like instead of like Black Fridaying, right? Like what can we do to like really practice true gratitude and understand sacrifice and then give a bit in that same way space too. What would you
Awesome. Thank you.
Why are you giggling?
He said, Jacqueline, do you have anything
Oh,
to add?
Jacqueline.
Yeah.
He
Oh, I
pulled
didn't
out
hear
the Jacqueline. Yeah.
I
don't
love
know
the
if,
Jacqueline. Oh, I'm sorry. Miss, I don't speak any French. So what is one thing that you would just wish people to know? Like what people, when you take away from your conversations, like something that you see, an issue that consistently comes up that you're always having to answer to. What's one thing that you would want people to know in regards to this work in your experiences?
I hate when I do this because it seems like people think I get all wooey wooey, but I find these quotes so I can say these things, right? But there's a quote from Rumi and it says, it's from a poem, and the last line of the poem is, "Through love, all pain is medicine." And what I think people don't understand is all of that ugliness and hurt and pain and everything, it's all just pain manifesting. Like I asked my counselor friend about what are we going to do to get out of this situation. And I was like, I think the only way out of this is radical, like a radical movement of healing of individuals across culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so for me, like, I want them to know, like, even when you do it and you replicate it and you do it unwittingly, like that's pain. And you were taught that pain, and you doing that to someone else is pushing that pain along. And all I'm asking you to do is let that go. Like attempt to heal that pain and not reproduce it again. Because like when we can like heal it, like it stops happening. And then the other thing too is we're also not like so responsible or scared of it, right? Because it's just the pain of generations echoing through us and the things that we were unconsciously asked to do. Because like it's that is the biggest issue, right? And like and I think that's what's so important about the work that we do. And that's also why, like, when I say, like, I think when I say, like, don't hire me for this thing, like, maybe people will look at me and think that's cool. Like, I save that patience for my students because, like, I feel like the return of investment I get on my students getting to understand this stuff so much earlier and less programmed into the badness that they're doing, that I want to like keep that patience for them and not like spend it out at different companies. Like for me, if I'm going to work with different companies, I want to like push you forward in things that like you're struggling with already, right? Like, because I need to save my patience for my students, right? Like for you, you've got the patience and that's what you do. And it's part of the cost of doing business. But that's where too, like when I was on your podcast, when I was like, thank you so much for what you do. And the fact that you show up and you go to work every single day, having to like do the work that you do. And thank God you get the joy from it that you do too, because like you're on that front line, like every single day over and over again, all the time as women, like, and the fact that you're willing to do it, you're doing work that frankly, I'd rather not do. And I hide in my communication job like where it's easier, and the part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast is so people can see and know that like folks like you are out there, that you too are in this process of like struggling and realizing and becoming, and that it's all the drops in the bucket matter, like of course 1 hour of bias training doesn't get you there, right? But like y'all are willing to be like, okay, I'm going to take this 1 hour contract. And I mean, I know y'all, I know how you have to do it. You got to be like, oh God, wincing going in. Cause you're just like, oh no, like, hopefully this is worthwhile. And I just like upset people, like,
we just do this. We just make a face that goes,
but
okay.
No, I'm glad you just said that though, because I think there's also, I don't take that contract. I won't take a one and done training because I know that it doesn't truly make an impact. And so it's when that ask is there, then we have a conversation about what actually needs to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's also educating for folks that are saying yes to that. Like, please think about the impact that you could have if you slow down and talk them through what they truly need. And I think a lot of consultants are kind of in space right now of trying to slow stuff down because I mean, we all know the murder of George Floyd happened and every company said we need to do anti-racism training tomorrow. And cool. And that's not actually going to solve it. So let's take a breath, do what's right for your entire team and do what's right for your people. And instead of training is go check on your people of color and make sure they're okay.
Yeah.
And we can talk through what this other process will be, but go talk to your team, go talk to the humans that you work with.
And I'm lucky because I used to take those, but everybody who signs up with me, we have a 1-year relationship.
Nice.
At a minimum.
That's great.
And I'm going to be all up in it.
Yeah. Well, I think y'all are like me because it's like, I don't want to take a job to get paid. Like, I want evidence things changed. I want to feel better about who you are with the time that I spent. Like when people asked me for George Floyd bids, I was like, I'm going to quote you the highest numbers in the world.
Exactly. Right. And if you say yes, then I can actually talk you into something else. So that doesn't,
Right. Right.
But I love what you're saying because I think one of, Jackye and I had an episode on writing goals and do we have goals? And one of my goals this year is I want to impact 1,000 people because that's what it is. It's cool that I get to do this as a job, but it's also like when you see that light bulb go off for someone, be still my
Energy for
heart.
the
Like
next
that
time.
just, I am so like, they get it. They are hearing what I'm saying and they're going to do better next time.
I love internally, we're having this conversation and all the people were talking about diversity and all the people were using the right words. And I just sit back.
Proud.
Oh,
Proud mama.
like,
Proud mama.
wow. You know, they're
My
fighting over
babies are
who's
growing
more
up.
anti-racist. It's so cute.
So with that, I have to get close to our wrap-up time because I only have such long stuff. So if you could reiterate who you are, what your companies are, and how they can get a hold of you, because I wanted to put you on this platform for folks that would need folks like you specifically. So either one of you want to go first?
All right. Well, I am Katee Van Horn. I lead VH Included Consulting and Coaching. You can find me on my website, vhincluded.com. I am on Twitter, Instagram, all the things. And you can listen to Jackye and I on the Inclusive AF podcast as well.
And I am Jackye Claton. That's Jackye with a Y-E, Claton. There's only one, which makes it a lot easier to find me. I'm a DEI strategist for Seek Out, and you can find me on all the things at Jackye Claton is my username for everything. So we can connect that way. And I look forward to meeting all of you.
Absolutely. And I just want
to listen to our podcast too.
Yes, yes. And I want to thank you so much both for being here, because like envisioning this, I just thought it would be so much fun to have like diversity people like talking roundtable about the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and like how do we navigate that? Because you know, we knew there'd be the laughing moments, but then they're like, how do you like bring yourself back to this stuff? Because I think that's what people need to hear. Because I think the mistake that so many people think is that we're done and we have this all figured out. Like we don't, and we correct and we talk to each other about things, and we're forever in this process of like trying to get a little bit better, because there's so much healing that has to happen. And I think y'all make it happen in a way that's very approachable and understandable. And I'm very happy to like have you in my diversity family of people. So thank you so much for being here. So with that, I've been Rowdy. This is the Inclusive Activism Podcast. If you want to get to know more about me and my organization, it's at inclusiveactivism.com. You can email me at inclusiveactivism@cox.net. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something that you can take forward and get a little bit better at and with. And I'm hoping this sparked opportunities for discussion with you and yours in the same space. So with that, have a great day. Be blessed. Take care.